think they're going. I've had a bit of a front row seat, and I'll tell you a little bit about this history. So that's me in about 5 years ago when I looked 10 years younger. This is a really difficult business. I'm actually only 24 years old. It's tough to hang on to your youth in the cybersecurity business, but I'm one of the founders of CI Security. I'm the founder and chair of the Pisces project, Pisces Public Infrastructure Security Cyber Education System, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the very end of my presentation. I spent a couple of years as a policy advisor for Washington State, advising the governor through the office of the CIO. I have been the vice chair of the State, Local, Tribal, and Territorial Government Coordinating Council, which is a Homeland Security Coordinating Council. That's part of the ecosystem of infrastructure protection. So the SLTTGCC, in addition to being the organization more in need of a vowel than any other, was one of the ways that we try to share information and institute processes to protect our local governments, notably. I was the chief of information security for the city of Seattle for about 7.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the private sector. I was the managing consultant for VeriSign Global Security Consulting and a principal consultant for Guardant, which was acquired by VeriSign. And that's actually part of the story. Going way, way back, I was the founder and CEO of a company in Southern California. We were hand rolling firewalls and selling them. And before all of that, I was an ocean scientist for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory doing satellite oceanography. So I have a pretty weird history. And part of the reason for going through all this is so that I hope you can see there's a great amount of context that I'm able to bring to some of the discussions. And interestingly, a lot of my history through going through these companies is completely aligned with managed security services. So I hope to tell a story about that. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the history, as I said, and the taxonomy. I'm going to name a bunch of companies. I'm going to look at the future, and we're going to talk about augmenting your team versus going it alone. I think fundamentally, the problem that we are all trying to solve is one of a shortage of people. If we were neck deep in cyber people and they were $30,000 a year apiece, we would hire our way out of this problem, but that's not what it is. So we'll talk about augmenting your team and what that looks like. The important part of this discussion, I think, is the mathematical underpinnings of why you would want to focus on detection and response. And so there's a very basic expression for risk. Risk is the product of the likelihood of a threat and its impact. And impact we usually think of in terms of dollars. If you're managing risk, the conversation about we have this much potential dollar amount of liability is a much more effective one than scary Russian cyber buffer overflow SQL injection is coming after us. So risk expressed in dollars, well, there's two terms here. There's the likelihood of that event, and that likelihood you can buy down with preventive controls. So firewalls and antivirus or endpoint security and email security. And, maybe you're using Microsoft's advanced threat protection to get artificial intelligence and statistical baselines built up of activities so that we can alert on any aberrational activity. That's all to make bad things not happen. When you have exhausted your methods for lowering the likelihood of one of those outcomes, and there's a lot of things that goes into that. Training your users is part of that. Managing your vulnerabilities is part of that. But once you've done all that, and historically, that's what we've all done. We've all invested a lot in preventive controls. You're left with the impact term. You buy down the impact term with effective detection and rapid response. And, as just an easy example of that, in today's world, getting some little piece of malware in your environment is a foreseeable event. The legal profession uses terminology like that very specifically because it has a legal meaning, the standard of foreseeability. Getting flattened by ransomware and extorted for $1 million is not an outcome that has to follow after you pick up a little piece of malware. And the way that you turn that impact into the help desk cleaned up somebody's workstation versus call the insurance company because nothing is operating. The choice is yours. So, the importance of detection and response in ensuring that a small grease fire on the stove doesn't burn down the house, I hope is fairly obvious to everyone. We've all evolved along with this, and I know that this is something that we take a lot of care with. Again, the problem being solved, especially in the health sector, is that there is just no access. It is impossible to compete, especially in mid-market and rural health, critical access, things like that. They just cannot compete with the Amazons of the world that are waving around giant bags of cash. And you can see this is a recent article, and you can see in the quote there, it's just completely confirms what I just said. It takes 70% longer to fill a security role than other IT jobs. And the reason is because hospitals can't pay people. And when the market economics favor the seller, it is a seller's market right now. So this is really the problem we're trying to solve. Again, someday in the future, we will be neck deep. In fact, there was another article that I was reading when I was doing research for this presentation that said for the first time, the number of open jobs in cybersecurity has actually gone down for the very first time. That could be a reflection of bad measurements. That could also be a reflection of the fact that every university, community college, et cetera, now has a cybersecurity degree program, and some fraction of the individuals that go through those programs actually are able to enter the workforce and be successful. So this really is the problem we are solving. And managed security has become the focal point for these resources. And I'll touch back on that later. So as I've gone through this evolution and have worked in a variety of companies that were focused on managed security services, I'm going to claim, because I don't know of any competitor to this claim, that we did it first. When I was running my company in Southern California, one of the things we were doing for our customers was monitoring web. The web was brand new. We were monitoring web use for customers and reporting back every time there were sites that were unique, that had never been hit before. We would do an evaluation of those sites. And so that was 1995, 1996 in Southern California, and we were hand rolling firewalls with the firewall toolkit on FreeBSD systems and deploying those into environments that today would never take a hand rolled firewall with a firewall toolkit running on FreeBSD. For example, one of the organizations was a company that does radar systems for the Navy. We built their first firewall. After that, this company called Guardant was a startup, and I was hired by Guardant when I was working at Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. And Guardant was a combination managed and professional services firm, and they were one of the first to take the name MSSP, Managed Security Services Provider. And very shortly thereafter, SecureWorks became an immediate competitor. And so we fought it out for a few years. And then in 2003, Guardant was acquired by VeriSign. And that's when I became the managing consultant for VeriSign. And being the managing consultant for VeriSign means that you go to work on an airplane, live in a hotel, drive a rental car, and eat in restaurants all the time. So I was 60 pounds heavier. And then a very key thing happened in 2006. There was a company called Lurk, and they were very good at doing this detection, monitoring customer networks, and then reporting when there was an aberrational event or an incident. And Lurk was acquired by SecureWorks. That same year, TrustWave opened up their first SOC in Madison, Wisconsin. And now there are a great number of these managed security service providers. In fact, there is a, what's the name of the publication? MSSP Alert, I think is the name of the publication. They have a top 100 MSSP list. So we know there's at least 100. There's a few there that are also of the kind of enterprise grade, right? AT&T, IBM, NTT. And eventually, these companies that had built their service offerings for the enterprise market ran out of enterprise customers. And it became a displacement effort. Every time somebody tried to get a new contract, they had to kick somebody else out. And it's interesting, very early on in our company, Symantec came and talked to us, and we had a couple of conversations with their chief scientists, asking, how is it you guys can go down market? Because they were just unable to do it. So now we have a very crowded field. In 2007, VeriSign changed their mind and said, you know what, we changed our mind about all those security businesses. We're going to keep DNS and certificates. They sold the managed security service provider to SecureWorks. So the MSSP that we started a long time ago is now actually part of SecureWorks. I don't know how much of it still exists. And the consulting business went to AT&T, and a lot of my friends are still there. And then Symantec, which also had a managed security service provider offering, sold all that to Broadcom, and then Broadcom sold the MSSP to Accenture. So this is what has gone on in the MSSP evolution, and how crowded the market space got, and how the enterprise, the Morgan Stanleys and the Safeways of the world were all taken care of. And then things had to change. So the SP, the service provider part of MSSP, this was always something that I won't say people complained about, but there was a lot of discussion about the nature of the touch that the MSSP would put on the customer when they have detected an event. And they were reporting false positives. People weren't super happy with the service, and they've evolved since then. But one of the things that that we think they did wrong was the way they priced it, because it was priced on events per second. If you had a really busy network, it was going to cost more, or log density if you were throwing in a lot of logs. The number of devices under management, and in fact, it kind of evolved into these hybridized offerings like managed SIM, right? So there was, I don't want to say customer flight, but customers began to demand more. And, there is still, if you talk to Gartner, Gartner will confirm these things and talk about, MSSP is actually a brand that companies are trying to stay away from now a little bit. So, and about that time, we started getting all kinds of uptick in activity. And, the uptick in activity back then was viruses, and, the rootkits were a new thing, and how, persistence could be achieved in a compromised network, and be stealthy and be accessible by a remote actor. All that started to happen. And then exploit sites came up. So Millworm was actually a very famous one. And, I used to get exploits from Millworm. And what that effectively did was lowered the bar in terms of the skill sets needed to be able to penetrate an organization, to cyber somebody. And wow, I mean, that was bad enough. That started to get people's attention, and I think things got much more serious after that, in terms of managing the impact term of the risk expression. And we started to evolve away from keep the bad guys out of the network to manage the risk of this foreseeable event. And as that proceeded apace, we evolved into managed detection and response. So this is probably a 5-year-old term, and I believe Gartner coined this term. And I think it's fairly ubiquitous now. Everybody knows what it means, but it was really a function of more agile companies getting into space. And you know, the large corporations, if you've ever worked for one, um, they are aircraft carriers that are extremely difficult to turn. Small companies can be a little more lithe and agile, as I say, and they started to take up the banner of we'll kick the bad guys out of the network for you. And one of the important things that managed detection and response, MDR companies, realized is this issue of preventive controls and how every organization in the world has deployed all kinds of preventive controls. And so it's important to leverage the existing security technology investments of your customer base. We can't force you to buy something. We're going to work with what you have. We will soak up events coming off all of your technologies. And that focus on big R, response, became a real differentiator in this space for managed detection and response. Because remember, one of the kind of common things people would talk about MSSPs is, well, you know, they told us they think this thing is going on and we better go check it out. That is providing a level of service, but it's really not what customers want. Customers want you to kick bad guys out of their networks. MDR companies generally do not manage customer technologies. We don't manage your firewall. We don't manage your IDS signatures. We don't manage your SIM system. This is not about managing technologies. This is about making use of the event traffic coming off of them. And then the other thing was, we know that as the enterprise has been played out, the big squishy middle is where we need to be working anyway. And that is why, frankly, our company focuses on mid-market health sector and local government, because they are both extremely critical to the scale that we actually live our lives, and they are completely underserved. So that criticality and the fact that they are underserved means that somebody needs to be a service provider out there. And so we intentionally work with those sectors. Local governments in particular, make your toilet flush, make your water drinkable, manage traffic, make sure that law enforcement, public safety get to your house before it burns down. And IT holds all that up. So focusing on the mid-market, and especially those things in the mid-market that are critical to us, we think is the right thing to do. And there are a lot of companies that share this mission focus. And now here we are. So health sector, you're being pummeled. This issue of this, you know, Ryuk ransomware being specifically focused in the health sector is awful. The fact that there were 3 hospitals in a single county that 2 weeks ago were crushed by an extortion event, ransomware, means that there are some actors that are maliciously targeting. So the ground is definitely changing. Nation states now are in this. It's very difficult to differentiate if a nation state is really behind it, or if it's actors that are being protected by or supported by a nation state. It's all very squishy right now. But the ground does keep changing, and we need to limit the impact of foreseeable events to the minimum impact possible. So MDR has evolved as well. So in the beginning, it was more about, we're going to pull events off your network traffic, right? Network flows, packet metadata. Today, it's about endpoint, it's about network, it's about what you have in the cloud, it's about making sure that we have access to a packet capture so that we have high resolution, high fidelity data to replay things, and it is about the response. That customer care, that response, that is the differentiator. And again, it's all people behind that. So rapid quarantine, the fact that we can, and especially in a distributed workforce where a lot of people are working from home, it is very important to be able to identify aberrational traffic and say, this one here goes into network jail until we figure out what's going on. That is a differentiator. Pricing, again, not events per second, not log density. Storage is cheap. We'll take all the logs you want to give us. Pricing is based on user activity. And that is because the number of users or objects that interact with the internet is nearly linearly correlated with the frequency of compromises that you're going to have in an organization. So we price based on user activity. In tomorrow's world, will augment all of this. In fact, this is today's world for our company with consulting services. And, you know, a shortage of cyber practitioners is not just about analysts. It's all about your compliance activities as well. And uh, making sure that you tick off all the boxes that you need to in order to demonstrate that you are managing security the way that you should for the regulators. Another demand which has been met is we want to know exactly what it's like to deploy this into our environment. We want to know what kind of resource allocation we're going to need as a customer to work with you as a service provider to get all this going. And so a very clear delineation is now part of the process of bringing on a customer. In fact, it's part of the sales process so that everyone knows exactly what this is going to be like. You know, the project plan is managed from the service provider side, and integration with customer resources is sometimes difficult. Making everything extremely clear, here's what we need to get done, is extremely important, as is making sure that the customer knows these event sources allow us to do this thing, and having an extremely crisp and reproducible, consistently applied set of data elements that we will need to receive as a baseline. All kinds of other things can come with this, but we really need these things. And so communicating this is a differentiator. It's all part of that customer experience. And then there's augmenting the team. And this is about not going it alone. So we have come to the realization, as have many of our customers, that in a large segment of the sector, you just can't do security well. You just cannot get the resources that you need, the human resources that you need. They're not available, they're expensive, they don't have a long residence time in an organization. So we augment with consultants that will come in periodically and handle the management aspects of security, the periodic requirements that you need to meet. For example, you know, your annual penetration test, et cetera. And making sure that your corrective actions are being addressed the way that they should. Every time you do an assessment, you're going to end up with this big steaming pile of things to fix. That needs to be managed as a group of corrective actions, and that list needs to get smaller over time. So your annual risk assessment, your security awareness training, your penetration testing, et cetera, all those can be outsourced as periodic events that where consultants will come in and do it as just a fixed length body of work. Now, finally, I said, this is about people. And so if companies like ours are a focal point for the people that are not available to much of our market, that means we own the people problem. And here is how we have addressed the people problem. We are partnered with the Pisces nonprofit. So again, public infrastructure security cyber education system. And what we do is this: we monitor down market cities and counties, local governments at no charge. Number one, because they're critical. They make my toilet flush. Number two, because they don't have any money. They cannot afford people. They can't afford technology. They can't afford a service. But they get police and fire to your house in time. We want them to be there. We don't want them to get knocked over. You know, counties conduct elections in 911 in the US, right? Emergency dispatch. So we do this monitoring for free at no cost in return for collecting data off these networks and not using our analysts and our security operations centers to evaluate those events. This is used as real-time live fire curriculum for right now 5 universities, and that number is expanding. So in this way, we have students going through university education. They get their book learning and their test taking, but they are sitting down as operational analysts using our monitoring stack. And when they roll off that assembly line, they are perfect analysts for us. So we're partnered with the Department of Homeland Security on this and Pacific Northwest National Labs. And the DHS folks we're working with really want this to expand. So our most recent university is Alabama A&M, which is one of the historically Black colleges and universities in the United States. And we are on a roll here. So with that, I think there may be a few minutes left for any questions, but we got about 3 minutes, just in case anybody wants to ask any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and also great that you mentioned Joe Panettiere and the MSS alert. We're big fans and love his latest list. Richard, have we got anything in the audience?
I'm seeing a few questions or a few comments here, but nothing.
Oh, I get that. What about nation states and the annual pen test? I guess that's a good point. It's not so much phrased in a question, but perhaps you mentioned people are targeted by nation states. Helen says, well, if you are, don't you have bigger problems?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, so just to illustrate, there was a hacking competition in China, and they were able to compromise every operating system within 5 minutes. If they can do that, there's not a lot that you can do to keep them out. So it's important that you detect when they are in and kick them out, because you can't keep them out. In fact, we have penetration testers as part of our professional services, and we always get in. If we can do it, nation states can do it too. So yes, everybody's got to up their game because of the involvement, because of this evolution now, and how nation states have become emboldened, and how the requirements for being one of these actors has been lowered. You can buy ransomware as a service with a credit card now. That means we really, really need to up our game.
Yeah. Sadly. What about you, Richard? Anything else? We've got something from Elio. He says, which is why we should be looking towards SEL for Certicos and similar. I can't profess to know what that means, but perhaps it's familiar with everyone else.
Not me.
Formally verified microkernels. No. Well, you didn't think that the debate would take that. Bug free. There you go. Plain English for me. Fantastic.
Yeah. In fact, I think there's a new CPU that Intel just came up with that's actually trying to do this at a larger scale. I don't know a lot about that.
Right. Well, cutting edge stuff by the looks of it. So
perfect.
Well, this was great and very insightful and very informative, Mike. And you are undoubtedly the wisest 24-year-old I've listened to all day.
Thank you.
You must have started work at about 4 years of age to fit all that experience in.
Yeah, well, it's so actually just complete transparency. I turned 60 recently, and so that's how I had enough time to do all of those things. And not sure what's next, but something will be next.
No, for sure. Well, I don't think any of us that work in the cybersecurity space are going to be unemployed for very long, no matter what. Anyway, I mean, the demand outstrips supply for the folks that can spell cybersecurity, let alone participate in the securing of business, particularly healthcare. So I think we all need to do our part to raise the next generation, right, and to guide those people that can't spell cybersecurity into secure decision-making processes. And hopefully that involves, the assistance of CI security in some of that moving forward.
Yeah, well, I caught part of the last talk, and I was listening about the storytelling that you need to do for executives, and I've spent quite a lot of time briefing senators, governors, generals, things like that, and man, I'm telling you, there's a conversation that works and there's a conversation that doesn't. And when it comes down to dollar amounts of liability and the potential for executive negligence, you have a much better audience. You have much better engagement than if you talk about, the very specific cyber vulnerability of the day that we need to address.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an act. I would agree with you. I've been in similar situations, and it's a language and it's an act, and I think that those upon high are gradually coming around to the reality that cybersecurity concerns them at their level, and even though they don't know the technical details of it, they need to understand the principles, right, and apply process and technology in order to resolve that. So,
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you once again, Mike, for sharing your thoughts and insights here today, and we look forward to seeing you at another one of these events.
Okay. Yeah, I hope to be in another one, and I hope not to be in the same little room that I've been in for almost a year.
I think we all do. All do.
Yeah.
Although I changed my little tube called an airplane for this little palace. So
Yeah, it looks good.
one small room shared with 200 other people flying coast to coast or flying overseas to one small room in my basement. But there we go.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've enjoyed it. I hope to do it again.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks so much. Thanks, CI Security as well. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, CI. So we are coming up on our next session. We have a panel.